Jonathan from HGM Electronics. In this video we're going to discuss the harness installation of the 4L60E, 4L65E and 4L70E transmissions, specifically the 13 and 15 pin variants which have no internal mode switch. These ones use the internal pressure manifold sensors. If your particular transmission does use the internal mode sensor or mode switch and it has 17 pins on your main solenoid connector, that particular transmission and harness are covered in a different video. So focusing on the main connections of the transmission leg of the harness, firstly we have our main solenoid connector. This is what carries current and power through to the solenoids and runs the transmission directly. You'll notice that there is an arrow on here to provide an orientation. The second leg, you have the transmission output speed sensor. You will notice that this is a 2-pin universal connection, and that is because we do have 2 separate looms that will adapt this connection to the early or late speed sensors depending on your configuration. Just a quick note regarding the output speed sensors for early and late. You will notice that there is significant difference between the 2 connectors. The early is the larger connector, the late is the smaller connector. To help determine whether you have a late or early transmission, you'll notice that we have here an early transmission, which is a all-in-one bell housing and transmission case. The late transmissions use a separate transmission and bell housing that are bolted together so the bell housing can be removed. Also on the output speed sensor loom, you'll notice there is a yellow wire, and this is for transfer case low range calculation. Only needed in 4-wheel drive applications. Lastly, you'll have one that is labelled TISS, which is transmission input speed sensor. In the 4L60, 65 and 70 transmissions, this connection is not required, as this is only for the 4L80s, which uses the same loom. So connecting our main solenoid connector to the transmission, again using our arrow as our orientation, we want that to be pointing to the outside of the transmission. Line it up, push until you hear a click. For the transmission output speed sensor, as I'm using an early transmission, I'm going to select the early adapter loom. I will connect that up to my universal connector, and this connects onto the other side of this particular transmission. Moving on from our transmission leg of the harness, we have our power leg, throttle position sensor leg, and optionally a torque converter clutch switch leg to discuss. With our power leg, you'll see our 2 main red and black wires. Now the red wire is your 12 volt ignition switched wire. This must not be connected to constant power, only ignition switched power. The black wire is our ground or earth wire. This must not be connected to sheet metal or steering column. These are not sufficient grounding points. We would like a factory earthing point, or better yet, run directly to the negative post on your starting battery. Also in the power leg, you will see a purple with white trace wire. This can be connected to your vehicle's speed sensor wire to provide an adjustable pulse count to run the speedometer in your dash cluster. Also in the power loom, we have our tach signal in. Now this is the engine RPM signal from your engine, so the COMPUSHIFT can understand what your revolutions per minute are for your engine. Lastly, we have our mode switch wires. This allows you to switch between the 2 calibrations that are built into the COMPUSHIFT at the touch of a button. We have 2 wires, one for the activation and one for a notification LED. The wire that is blue with an orange trace is your mode switch wire. This is connected to ground momentarily. The blue with red trace is your LED notification wire to let you know that you're in the second mode or the B mode. This can only be connected to an LED, such as on a switch. It cannot be connected to an incandescent bulb. The TPS leg of the harness is for connection to a throttle position sensor. There are many different ways that you can do this. We do have some universal TPS units, EFI tap-in looms, as well as quite a few different adapter harnesses to common TPS systems. If you decide that you need to use a different TPS than we currently have available, you can also cut these wires off and join these directly. Check out our TPS calibration and installation video for more information. If your harness was optioned with the torque converter clutch switch control wires, then you will find a separate loom with two wires that are orange and white and orange and black. These two wires will activate and also notify of when the torque converter clutch is engaged. The torque converter switch wire is the orange with black trace wire. This is connected through a switch momentarily to ground. The orange with white trace wire is your LED notification to let you know when the torque converter clutch is engaged. This is only suitable for an LED light only. It cannot be connected to an incandescent bulb. For those of you using an engine management system that can be connected via CAN, we have our twisted pair wires coming out of the harness. This is terminated using a 2-pin Deutsch connector. If you're using a setup that does not require this connector, you can cut this off and use the wires directly. The tan with black trace is your CAN high, and the solid tan is your CAN low. You'll also note that on some of the legs that end up going outside of the vehicle, we have these pre-fitted grommets so that it makes fitting through the firewall or the cabin floor just that little bit easier. That concludes this video. Thanks for watching.